Hey guys, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about Photoshop brushes and what you can do with them, how to make them, and the general options that are available that you can kind of play with. So I'm sure if you've opened and used Photoshop before, you've managed to play around with a typical brush in Photoshop, and usually they start out just as a round brush with really nothing special about them. And there's actually quite a lot you can do with brushes. The most obvious and probably most useful thing is the pressure sensitivity. And so I have a hotkey kind of here on the side, or I guess a hot brush that I can click and it'll have pressure sensitivity already applied to it. This is really useful for doing line work, for painting, pretty much all around super brush. If you're curious on how to turn that on, and you have like the regular not making any difference brush, it's really easy to do. You go into your brush settings, which is just window, brush settings, hotkey of F5, check under shape dynamics, and under here, size jitter, you could have pen pressure, and then the other one we had that was making a difference with the how light it showed up was something called transfer. So right now you see when I paint, I am getting the pressure sensitivity, which if you're not getting that, check here. Very useful for line work, and if you want to draw small, just put a little pressure. Bigger, put some more. So if we go here to transfer, and then we set this also under control to pen pressure, and there's other options you could play with as well. I find pen pressure generally the most useful. Then all of a sudden, now you have both it getting smaller and more opaque as you push down harder. And sometimes, as an aside, while painting, I will just do opacity, and you can change how much the minimum is and stuff like that. I definitely think you should dig in there and play around with it. But the most used brush is probably just shape dynamics with size turned to pen pressure and transfer turned on. That out of the way, there's other brushes that are important as well, I think. So right off the bat, we got a hard round, but other shapes are definitely useful. So another one you'll see used a lot is like a square brush, a flat edge brush. I have a lot of fun with these for painting, as well as if you want just like crisp, hard shapes, getting a flat edge just to come to an end like that can be really handy. I will make one generally if I'm starting with the flat round. So if I clear this out, if I'm starting from here, an easy way to do that is in the brush tip shape. This will let you control kind of the roundness of the brush. And so if you grab these little handles and pinch them down, you can even see it down here. The shape of the brush is changing. And now you're noticing it's kind of thin now. And I could go here and redirect where the top, or I guess the front of the brush is, the angle of it. And now I'm getting it be a lot thicker. And now in conjunction with that, you should know that in shape dynamics, there is something called angle jitter. And right now I have it being controlled by direction, which means when I paint a direction, it's, even though you see it thinner, it's kind of squashed, the shape of the oval, it's still doing the wide side. And that's because I have direction set. So when I paint and move around, it's following that. That's really good to know. If I turned it off, you'll notice it's staying thin from that angle, and it's wide when I paint to the side. So this could be useful for like calligraphy and stuff like that. It still has its use. In some cases, I will use initial direction. So this way I can do both. I could paint and get the thick side and then go to the side, and I'll get both until I lift my pen up and go again. And now it's wide when I go sideways and thin when I go up and down. So I'll have that on a lot. Just kind of have this on direction right now. And again, you can change the shape and the roundness of the brush. This control right there, you'll see move. So that's useful. In addition to that, we also have hardness, and it's pretty much just what it sounds like. It's going to say whether or not the brush has soft edges. If you want clean, smooth transition between things, or stuff to be out of focus, or just, to blend in a different way, hardness value is very useful for that. The other settings I want to point out right off the bat, up top, you have your opacity controls. So if you want to paint a little less powerful from the beginning, you could put that down, and now that will be kind of the opacity that your pen is painting at. If you lift up your pen and paint again, it's going to get that much darker until eventually you will reach, as dark as you can get. That's what we were controlling in the transfer. So you can control that here, or there's a hotkey of your numbers above your keyboard. If you, above your QWERTY, press any of those and it will move your opacity to that. So pressing 0 will bring it back to 100. You could also do things like 35. If you press the numbers quick enough, then you'll get that opacity. I'll usually have this all the way up depending on what I'm doing, but sometimes if I want things to blend a little better, I can go into the 80s or so. I definitely play around with it. You also have the option of flow. Now this is really confusing. Usually there's opacity and flow, and like, well, what's the difference? Flow, if you start painting down, you'll notice it's also lighter, but the way flow works is it like builds up over time. It's kind of like an airbrush. If I turn this down even more, you'll see it. And this is kind of in junction with another thing I'll talk about. So when I paint down now, if I keep swirling, it's building up the color. It's building up your brush stroke. And so this is really nice for blending as well if you want. But the difference now, so if I turn that back to 100 and turn my opacity down and do the same thing, it's clamped at that color until I pick my pen back up and put it down. Now with flow, the spacing will kind of determine how many are put down, how fast, how many strokes are put down fast. So I could kind of, well, because it's going to limit how many are going down at a time, how many brush strokes are put down at a time. But what I'm trying to go at is that having your spacing super low is going to make the flow build up faster, quicker. But generally, I'll put the flow pretty far down to be able to see its effects, because I don't like having spacing very high to begin with. But play with that value. It's kind of fun to paint that way, especially, like I said, for blending. Make sure your colors, you could still reach a fuller value without having to pick your pen up and down. But they both have their place. So we got round brushes, we got flat brushes, soft brushes. You know how to make it pressure sensitive. They all have their own place. What else is there? Well, there's brushes that have a texture on them too. So you'll notice there's a bunch of stuff in your kind of brush settings, all these different tip shapes. And so some of these aren't exactly textured as in using this texture option right here, but they have like a different look to them, right? And so they're putting down, like, this could be a different kind of like alien skin, or like patterning for an animal. You put it down and you're kind of getting a cool look to it. So that's possible with brushes too, by choosing in here, or I'll show you how to make one soon too. So that's one way to change your brush up. If we do go to texture, right? So I'll go back to my regular brush and I'll click texture here. Now what happens when I paint? We're not seeing anything there. We have options here and we could import patterns. I'm just going to choose one that's on the default here. And we're painting and we're not really seeing it. But if I edit, I believe it's depth here, we can kind of paint with that pattern. So this could be cool in its own way as well. And then you have all kinds of different, jitter to make it show a little differently. You could also assign this to your pen pressure and change how it's actually affecting it if you want it to be an overlay. You got your scale and everything too. All kind of valuable in their own ways. I don't use this very often, but I'm sure you could come up with a use for it. So the last one I want to show is an option called scattering. And scattering can be really useful if you're trying to do some kind of, I guess, putting down a spray of like pores or something like that, right? So if I make this brush smaller and then I turn the scatter up, you could see in the preview here what it's doing. And the further I go, all of a sudden, we have a different effect there. And we could turn up the count, which is how many are going to go down at once. And I can keep turning it up. I can turn it to both axes, and now it's going to scatter in both directions. And so you can see where this is going. So if I make my brush size really small, turn my scatter really high, that's pretty cool. And you could also play with the jitter, and you could also set these control again to your pen pressure or tilt or fade. So the more I push down, the more it's going to jitter around. So this is still kind of tight though, right? It's not scattering very far. So what we can do in this case is go to brush tip shape and then adjust the spacing. And it'll push it out a little more, which can help depending on the look you're going for. So scattering is super useful, super fun. And I'll show you another use for that soon as well. So let's go over how to make one though, real quick, and then I'll go through some use cases. So if you want to make your own brush, because you notice all these different shapes in here, it's actually quite easy. The base idea of it is putting down, oopsies, Photoshop is freaking out on me. Sometimes my hotkeys get all finicky. So we're just making a shape here. We'll just do that, right? You could paint pretty much anything you want, and then you'll select it. Just make a selection over it and go edit, define brush preset. And this is going to take whatever we put down, and it's going to take into account the opacity too, right? So this is like not full value, and you could see here it's not going to put down the full volume value as well. So we click OK, and now it has selected it already. So now we have that down, and we could paint with that. And right off the bat, it's kind of like weird, like why would I use that, right? But it's actually pretty powerful when you combine it with the shape dynamics, the scattering, if you want to, kind of make it pop all over the place. Then you could also do things like auto rotate, right? Angle jitter. So when you pop it down, let's go back to scattering. I'll keep that on. It will come in at different rotations. So for stuff like leaves, perhaps, you can get that in, and it can be very useful. So let's see here. Let's say another way that we can make a brush. Another thing you can do is I'll bring in an image that I took, a picture that I took, and we have all kinds of stuff going on here. And so, for example, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to grab some of these leaves, right? So I like this little patch right here. I'm just going to go ahead, make a selection around them. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to paste them in my other scene, right? Rotate it a little so it fits in there. And now let's edit these. I want this to be black and white, and I want to have a better idea what it's going to look like. So in this case, I'm going to use select color range. And this is really useful for grabbing. It already has the greens on there. I was testing this out beforehand. So I could click a color and it will select as close as it can that color, and you can see it updating. So I'm going to click the greens, and you could adjust the fuzziness if you want it to like alpha out a little better. So I'm going to make it a little tighter there and hit OK. Now I'm going to invert my selection and hit delete, and now I'm left with just the leaves. So I'm going to duplicate that layer a couple times, collapse it down, and then I'm going to make it black and white and throw a levels on there because I want it to be a little darker. And now at this point, we could clean it up a little. I think you see where this is going though, right? Clean it up a little, as much as you like, really. Or if you want to make it more stylized, you could actually go in and start painting on the shapes, to flatten it out a little. Or you could, have the selection you had before and kind of just hit fill or something. But you could do something like that, or you could use it as is. Just gonna undo it in this case. Again, hit my selection. I'll make a selection of it. Now let's go edit, define brush preset. And then look at that, we see it right there. We call it leafy greens. And immediately it selects it for us. And that looks pretty cool, right? And so we could just stamp it down. We could change the size of it, make it smaller, or we could do some of the stuff we were talking about, right? So if I go into shape dynamics, maybe I won't, keep it the same size. I could go by pen pressure, and the size jitter, the more I push down or the lighter I push down, it's gonna be smaller, or I press harder and it's bigger. And in addition to that, maybe we want it to be at a different angle every time, right? This is pretty fun stuff. We could do the same thing. We got scattering on. We could have it spread apart more. Oopsies. I turn the layer back on there. Let's get rid of what we have on there. And then it's a pretty quick way to block out something like that. And now we could go into color dynamics, and this will let us set a jitter or saturation jitter, brightness jitter, a foreground and background jitter, all to your brush. So in this case, maybe I want a light, yellow, and on the background to be like a dark green, or just those two colors. And now it'll jitter between them. It will jitter with saturation, and then purity will be essentially how much of the color comes in there. So if I paint it down now, we're gonna get the light greens. I'm gonna turn the yellow a little higher, all the way to the dark green, and I could have it go between the foreground and background depending on how hard I'm pressing my brush tip in. And so if I turn purity down, you'll see it starts doing grays, and if I turn it up, it's going to do saturated colors. And so you could adjust all those settings now, make the brush as big or as small as you want. And that's a really fun way to block stuff in, or if you're speed painting, that could be really useful. So I'll do another example just so we could play around with it some more. Get rid of that. Let's see here. So what's the next one I got? Okay, another idea here. We want some texture, right? We don't always necessarily need it to be foliage, as much as I like my leafy greens. Let's just select a cool looking part here. So I'll grab this, copy, paste. I'm going to shrink it a little since my document is kind of tiny here. And then same thing, I'm gonna make it black and white, or you could, do hue saturation. Again, maybe go in and clean it up some more if you want it to be crisp. Sometimes it's probably not gonna matter, but depending on what your goal is, maybe you want like really crisp edges, right? So I'll get rid of like this, and I'll cut that open like a surgeon right now, man. Huh. Right, we'll get like a cool silhouette with it. That'll do the job. And then I'll go in, and I'm gonna make it a lot more stark with my shapes, with the black and white shapes, because I'm looking for those cracks more than anything, right? So I can make sure the darks are really dark, and the lights kind of blow out to white. And you could edit some more from there if you like. And then same thing. And you don't even have to use this whole thing, because this is like really detailed right now. I'm just gonna grab the whole thing anyway. Define brush preset. Remember, we can name it if we want. I'll name it Rocky. Get rid of it. And we got it there. And we could grab any color, and we can kind of place it down. And what we can also do is with the shape, we can go, let's see, direction or tilt to kind of get different. If we want to stamp things down, right? Maybe I want it over here, and then I want this one, we're messing with tilt a little. I want it to face that way, and you can kind of build up and then erase away and get creative with it. Like I said, you don't have to have like that whole rock. You can just get small portions of it. Like if we only wanted to do the deeper cracks, we could have gone in and erased away the brighter portions, and then all of a sudden we could paint down just like the crack areas. Maybe you're doing some stone textures, right? Block it in like that, and then just paint over it. And then we'll do one more example. Right, you got your bushes here, but I'm looking at the brick here. This kind of cool, very stark colored brick shadows. Let's just use those. Boom, copy, paste. This one's actually huge. Oh, the other ones are big. And you could actually, if you make your brush that big, it'll be a higher resolution too. I think it keeps the resolution of what you made the brush's size at. You could always adjust it later, obviously. So same thing here. Go to my levels. I'm just looking for those cracks. Actually, I'm going to try doing the black and white first. See if it makes a difference. Right, now we go in, we clean it up. Maybe we use a soft brush this time. Actually, screw it. I'm just gonna like we were talking about before, maybe we get rid of all the inside stuff. You keep it if you like. It's the kind of power you got. And same thing, you kind of get creative with it. Now you say, oh, well, define that. And you can start. Oh, I'm using my eraser. Oh, that's the other thing. You can use it. That's actually a good point. You can use these brushes to erase with too. So if you want to get creative with that, and now all of a sudden, man, we just painted an entire brick wall using the brush that we had just set up. So that's pretty damn handy, if I say so myself. And of course, all the other effects still apply to it. So the other thing I want to show you, I believe I covered this in the blending video too, but another use for smudge, or for scattering, excuse me, is smudge brushes. So normally, without scattering, you try to blend these things together. It's just kind of like pushing the color around. But if you turn on scatter, even if it's a low amount, like in this case is 20, it immediately blends so much nicer. So you can get creative with your scattering as well. So I hope that helps. I want to remind you guys that while using fancy brushes or other brushes, I'm sure you'll see plenty of them online. They can be really handy if you have a goal in mind with them. If you're using them for a purpose, for something in mind, like putting down high detail areas, right? If you're doing foliage, or if you're blocking things in really quickly, like we did with the brick, or like some grunge, right? If you want to put some grunge down areas with pen tilt enabled, and you're just kind of laying in some spots, and you could go and paint over it. One thing to keep in mind though is that don't try to rely on them, and don't go with like this brush lust that you have to, what brush were they using because it's going to make me better. It's not going to make your eyes any better. It'll save you time in certain situations if you're seeing that you're doing something repetitive or some similar shape that you can use. You still want to practice regular painting and training your eye. Definitely leverage these kind of things now that you know how to make them, the different functions for them. It's going to come in handy, and I'm sure there's going to be lots that you're going to go out and do with them. And then over time, you're going to discover what you enjoy painting with, and you're going to get your own preferences and how you use certain brushes. I've seen plenty of people in the industry get really creative with how they're laying color down. For another example, right? If I had my color brush here, I can lay this down real quick, and I'll probably go over this in one of the other tutorials as well about color, is that if you turn on color dynamics to that foreground background jitter, I'm gonna turn this stuff off, and it's on pen pressure right now. But if I go ahead and I'll do my background a different blue, right, or like a green, teal, now when I vary my pen pressure, it changes between colors. I'll make that a little more obvious. So the harder I push, the different color that is. Now if you mix that up with some smudging, like immediately, or like a different color or different brush shape, you get some really interesting backgrounds that have plenty of life and vibrancy in them before you even start painting your real stuff, right? So you could get crazy with it. But it can come in handy. It's just good to know what's available and what tools you have to use. You'll get used to it, and it's going to be really handy. Other thing I would recommend is that if you are painting and you're trying to do drawing and texturing and whatnot, I do recommend to get a tablet. look for a drawing tablet online or find a used one on Craigslist or whatnot. They're very handy. I would not recommend doing this with a mouse, nor will you get the pressure sensitivity. But either way, I hope this shines some light on different types of brushes, how you can make them, and what they're capable of. The other tidbit I want to share with you guys is, now that you have your brushes, how do you manage them? So in Window Brushes, it'll pop up this guy right here. And if you have a newer version of Photoshop, Photoshop CC, there's a lot of great preset brushes. Kyle Webster, I believe, did a lot of brushes that he had for sale before, now integrated within Photoshop, free to use. So that's really nice. But you could also make your own kind of folders for this stuff. And you'll notice the ones we made while we were watching, while you were watching the other tutorial, are right here. And we can sort them into any of these folders if we want. So by clicking the folder brush here, and then you can type a name for it, and you can just click and shift click again to select multiple and just drag it in. You could rename the folder if you like. You could delete them. And then you just select them by clicking, which is really useful. The other important thing to know about these, so if we have this brush, right, and we're placing it down, maybe, you know, we don't want it to paint like this, and how I was showing you, you could put scattering and color dynamics on it. Maybe we want it to do that, and we'll have, you know, the size jitter turned on and the angle jitter turned on, and we want it to stay that way. Well, if we click this little page button down here, it'll do a new brush, and we have these settings that we want to pay attention to. First one is capture the brush size. So when you click that, it'll go back to the size that it currently is, in this case 400. Include tool settings, which is everything that we kind of set up right here under brush settings. So we want to keep that. And you also have the option to include color. So if your brush is reliant on being a certain color, or you just prefer to have that start up when you click it, you want to check that as well. So if I hit OK, it's going to make another version of it. And you notice immediately it looks different already because it's showing us what the preview was. And then this icon here is going to tell us it's a brush. We can also have, if I scroll up to my other brushes, it'll show you when it's smudge. It's basically the icon over here. So you can have erasure brushes. You can have, you know, your regular brush, whatever kind of tool preset you're using, it'll give you a little indication of that. There's also more options if you click this little kind of 4 lines up here and go to Preset Manager. Now you can see all of them at once, and you can edit them or even save them out. You have to select the ones you want to save out, or you could do multiple again by holding Shift and clicking. And you could do Save Set, name it whatever you want. Or if someone sends you or you download some online, you could just click Load and then navigate to where the file is, and then it'll pop up right in there. And then you'll have access to all of them. So after you get some brushes or make some brushes that you like, make sure you make them really easy to access. That way you can kind of go through them and select them with ease. The slider down here, good to know, it will adjust the size of your preview. And then you can also turn on and off the name if you name your brushes, the stroke itself if you want to see the stroke preview or not, or the tip, right? So if you just want the names, then you can fit more at once to view them at one time. So I'll generally just turn off the name, but you get fancy with it. And if it's wide enough, I think it will double layer them as well, assuming I can click it. There we go. So you can see. So if you want to like have a strip of your brushes along the bottom of your screen or something like that, you can absolutely do that. There you go. One last thing I'd like to show you guys that might hopefully inspire you to play with and make your own brushes is try something like this. You can go and grab some paint, you know, paintbrush, and just go crazy on a piece of paper or several pieces of paper. I did like 6 or 7 of these just for fun, some in color, some black and white, scanned them in, and you could see there's some really cool textures you can get with different types of brushes. You could use ink, you could use acrylic, whatever you got on you really, because it's just about capturing kind of the essence of that real world feel of, you know, tactile brushes. Can give you some really nice shapes to work from that might be really annoying to kind of grab from a photo of, you know, the wall. You know, you'll get cool results like that, but it'll be different because we're using kind of different devices and techniques here. And so something like that might be kind of annoying to paint by hand and then capture too. But, kind of going in with a real paintbrush on a piece of paper, let us just kind of go wild with different shapes and stuff. We can then grab one of those. I'll pop that in its own thing. And then just generate a brush from that. Call it brushy, and then let's play around with it, right? So I'll get rid of that, make it a lot smaller. And then, okay, how do we want to set this up? So what did we look at before? Because right now, it's cool, but it might not be as useful as it could be. So immediately what I would do in this case is I'll set the size jitter. I will set the angle jitter. I'll put it on direction in this case. You could play with a tiny bit of scattering if you want. I'm going to do some transfer. Let's take a look at it, what it is right now. So immediately, just from turning on transfer with pen pressure and the shape dynamics set to direction and size, it's kind of a really nice like fuzzy brush there. And if we want, we can go in, throw in some color dynamics. I got to make sure that this image is a color image. First of all, the scan was in grayscale, and so it made another grayscale. So we'll go ahead. Now we got some color, but it's like a really nice, like fuzzy, kind of furry kind of brush right there. We can go through with our color dynamics, and I'll give it just a little bit of hue and saturation jitter. And then so you see we got some green tones sneaking up in there. And so this could be a really nice way to get like a very painty feel if you don't have a painty brush already. Go play around, paint, scan it in, or take a photo, and then bring it in to Photoshop and make a brush out of it. And we could do the same thing with another one of these. Maybe we'll make one that's more of like a background thing, because look at the crazy kind of shapes that we have here, right? What if we grab this one? I haven't tried this yet. Let's give it a go. Copy that. Go ahead and define the preset. I'll go back into the other scene. Right, get rid of this. And same thing, we got some cool edging there already. But I'll put on the same stuff. It's pretty typical right away. We can, play around with a different kind of angle, or we could do angle jitter or whatnot. And pressure for our angle jitter, right? And the more pressure we put on, it'll rotate it around. Another option that's available over here is called wet edges, which kind of gives like a watercolory vibe, where the edges are a little darker than the inside. So that might be fun to play with too. So now all of a sudden you got like this watercolor type brush, right? How fun is that? So we'll go get some blue. So I encourage you, play around, try different shapes and colors. Again, you could try some scattering with this. It's gonna throw the paint around even more. This could be a really nice way to block in your textures, or just do some watercolor painting if you're doing an illustration. So yeah, I hope that maybe that gets you wanting to try this and make your own brushes, and share them online, put them on the forums, make some cool paintings with them.